Can I stay here? I don't want to go home. Ethan bent slightly so he wouldn't tower over her. Why don't you want to go home? He asked gently. The girl hesitated before answering. Our lights are off, she said. Ethan waited. At home, she added softly. They turned them off today. He studied her face carefully. And why are you here so late? He asked. Where are your parents? My mom's working, the girl said quickly. She cleans the rooms upstairs. Housekeeping? She nodded. She works the night shift. Ethan glanced toward the elevators. Somewhere above them, housekeeping staff were still moving quietly through hallways, replacing towels and making beds for guests who would never think about the lives of the people doing the work. And you're waiting for her down here? Yes, sir. Behind Ethan, the night security guard cleared his throat. Mr. Whitmore, I was just explaining to her she can't stay in the lobby all night. The girl stiffened immediately. I can sit very quiet, she said quickly. I won't touch anything. Ethan raised a hand slightly, stopping the guard from saying more. His attention stayed on the child. What's your name? He asked. Annie, she replied. Annie Brooks. Well, Annie, Ethan said calmly. I'm curious about something. She looked up. Why did you come ask me? The question seemed to embarrass her. She glanced toward the security guard. He called you the boss. Ethan turned his head slightly. Mr. Davis suddenly looked uncomfortable. Annie continued carefully. He said the owner is here. Ethan looked back at her. And that's why you asked me? She nodded. If you're the owner, she explained, then you're the one who decides who can stay. The simple logic of the statement almost made Ethan smile. He studied her again. You know, he said thoughtfully, I could have someone walk you home. One of our drivers could take you back to your apartment. Annie shook her head immediately. No, sir. Why not? My mom's still working, Annie said. She hasn't finished yet, and you want to wait for her. Yes. Ethan nodded slowly. But you said your home is only a few blocks away. It is, Annie said quietly. Then why not wait there? She lowered her eyes. Because it's dark. The electricity? She nodded. The bill didn't get paid yet. Mom said she'll fix it when she gets her paycheck. The hotel lobby lights glowed warmly above them. But tonight there aren't any lights, Annie said. Ethan remained silent. And something happened yesterday, she added. Ethan leaned slightly closer. What happened? Her voice grew quieter. When we went home last night, the hallway outside our apartment was dark. Ethan listened. The light in the hallway stopped working, Annie explained. Mom had to use her phone to see the door. She paused before continuing, and there was a man sitting on the stairs. Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. What kind of man? I think he was drunk, Annie said softly. He kept laughing and talking loud. What did he do? Annie hesitated. When we walked past him, he started saying things to my mom. What kind of things? Her small hands twisted together. He was teasing her, she said quietly. Calling her pretty and asking why she was out so late. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. My mom didn't say anything, Annie continued. She just held my hand and walked faster. What did the man do? He laughed, Annie said, and he kept talking while we went inside. She looked up at Ethan again. The hallway was really dark, she added. Ethan understood. And tonight you don't want to go back there when it's dark again. Annie shook her head quickly. No, sir. Her voice softened. Mom says it'll be okay when the lights come back. She looked around the glowing hotel lobby. But tonight I just wanted to stay somewhere bright. The sentence settled quietly between them. Ethan straightened slowly. He turned toward the front desk. Call housekeeping, he said. The clerk immediately picked up the phone. Yes, sir. Find Loretta Brooks and ask her to come down to the lobby. Annie looked up. That's my mom. I know. Ethan looked back at her. And while we're waiting, he said, I think we should get you something to eat. Annie blinked. You mean food? Yes. She hesitated. I don't have money. Ethan crouched slightly again so their eyes met. You're not paying tonight. She studied his face carefully, trying to decide whether he meant it. Then she asked the question that revealed just how worried she had been. Am I in trouble? Ethan shook his head. No. His voice softened. You're not in trouble. Annie watched him for another moment before nodding. Ethan gestured toward the seating area near the electric fireplace. Go sit there for a minute, he said. Somewhere warm. She walked quietly across the lobby and climbed onto one of the chairs. The lamp beside it cast a warm circle of light around her small figure. Ethan remained standing in the center of the lobby, because in a hotel filled with light and warmth sat a girl who had asked for permission to stay where the lights were still on. The elevator chimed softly. Ethan Whitmore lifted his eyes toward the polished steel doors just as they slid open. A woman stepped out quickly, almost too quickly for the calm rhythm of the Whitmore Grand Lobby. Her housekeeping uniform was neat but worn at the seams, and a few strands of dark hair had slipped loose from the bun at the back of her head. She looked as though she had rushed down the moment someone called her. Her eyes found Annie immediately. Annie? The relief in her voice was instant, but it was tangled tightly with something else, fear. Annie jumped down from the chair. Mom. Loretta Brooks crossed the lobby in hurried steps and dropped to one knee, pulling her daughter into a tight hug. What are you doing down here? She whispered. I told you to stay in the break room. I was, Annie said quickly. But Mr. Davis said I couldn't stay there. Loretta looked up then, noticing the security guard and the front desk staff watching the scene with careful neutrality. And then she saw the man standing a few feet away. Her face changed immediately. Loretta stood up quickly. Mr. Whitmore, she said, her voice tight with embarrassment. I'm so sorry. I didn't know Annie came down here. Ethan studied her calmly. Up close, she looked younger than he expected. Maybe around 30, though exhaustion had carved faint shadows under her eyes. Her uniform sleeves were rolled neatly at the wrists, and the name tag pinned to her chest read Loretta. No apology necessary, Ethan said. Loretta shook her head quickly. No, sir, it is. I shouldn't have brought her tonight. The sitter canceled this week and her voice faltered. I didn't have anyone else. Annie tugged gently at her sleeve. I didn't get in trouble, the girl said softly. Loretta's hand rested on her daughter's shoulder, protective by instinct. Ethan noticed the way she positioned herself slightly between Annie and the rest of the room. She didn't cause a problem, he said. She asked a question. Loretta looked confused. A question? Annie looked up at her mother, then down again. I asked if I could stay here, she admitted. Loretta's eyes widened. Oh, Annie, I didn't know what else to do, Annie said quietly. Loretta pressed her lips together and closed her eyes for a second, clearly fighting back embarrassment. I'm very sorry, sir, she said again to Ethan. She shouldn't have bothered you. Ethan shook his head slightly. She wasn't bothering me. Loretta looked uncertain. Ethan gestured gently toward the chair Annie had been sitting in. She told me about the electricity. Loretta froze. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she looked down at Annie. You didn't have to tell him that, sweetheart. Annie's voice was small. He asked why I didn't want to go home. Loretta exhaled slowly. I see. Ethan spoke calmly. Your daughter also mentioned something about a man outside your building last night. Loretta's shoulders tightened. It wasn't a big deal, she said quickly. What happened? She hesitated before answering. There's a guy who hangs around the stairwell sometimes, she admitted. Drinks too much. Her tone was careful, as though she were trying to make the situation sound smaller than it was. He likes to talk. Annie looked up. He was teasing Mom, she said quietly. Loretta placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. It was nothing, she insisted. He didn't touch us. Ethan watched her closely. And tonight the hallway is still dark. Loretta nodded reluctantly. Yes. The electricity in your apartment? Turned off this afternoon. Her voice was steady but tired. I'm waiting on my paycheck. It'll be taken care of in a few days. Ethan considered that. And in the meantime, Loretta forced a small smile. We manage. The sentence sounded like something she had repeated many times before. Annie looked up at Ethan again. I just didn't want to go back there tonight, she said softly. Loretta immediately knelt down beside her. Sweetheart, we talked about this. I know, Annie whispered, but it's really dark. If Annie's quiet courage touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you are watching from tonight. And if you believe stories about kindness and justice still matter, please subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story. Loretta looked at Ethan again, her embarrassment deepening. I'm sorry you had to hear all this, sir. Ethan remained quiet for a moment. How long is your shift tonight? He asked. Loretta blinked slightly. Another 3 hours. And Annie was planning to wait here until you finished. Loretta nodded. She usually stays in the staff break room. Mr. Davis cleared his throat uncomfortably. We had to close that area for cleaning tonight. Loretta's eyes closed briefly. Of course. Ethan looked down at Annie. The girl was watching both adults carefully, as though trying to understand whether she had made things worse. Then Ethan spoke. Miss Brooks, he said calmly. Loretta looked up. Yes, sir. You said the electricity will be back once the bill is paid. Yes. And your daughter is afraid to go back tonight while it's still dark. Loretta's voice softened. She'll be all right. Annie looked unconvinced. Ethan glanced around the quiet lobby. The chandeliers glowed warmly above them. It was a comfortable place, and a very safe one. He looked back at Loretta. Your shift ends at midnight? Yes. Then Annie can stay here until you're finished. Loretta's eyes widened slightly. Oh no, sir, I couldn't. You're not asking, Ethan said gently. He looked toward the front desk. Have the kitchen bring something warm for her. The clerk nodded immediately. Yes, Mr. Whitmore. Loretta shook her head, clearly overwhelmed. That's not necessary. It's already done. She looked down at Annie, who was staring up at her with cautious hope. I don't want to cause trouble, Annie said quietly. Loretta swallowed hard. You're not causing trouble, Ethan said. He gestured again toward the chair by the fireplace. Why don't you sit back down, Annie? The girl hesitated. Then she looked at her mother. Loretta nodded slowly. All right. Annie climbed back onto the chair, her small figure once again surrounded by the warm circle of lamplight. Ethan turned back to Loretta. You should return to your shift, he said. Loretta hesitated. Sir, I don't know how to thank you. Ethan shook his head. Just finish your work. For a moment she looked as though she might say something else. Instead, she nodded. Thank you. She knelt beside Annie once more. I'll be done soon, sweetheart. Okay. Loretta kissed her daughter's forehead before standing and walking back toward the elevators. The doors closed behind her. Ethan remained standing in the lobby for a few seconds longer. Across the room, Annie sat quietly beside the fireplace, her legs swinging gently from the edge of the chair. The kitchen doors opened, and a waiter stepped out carrying a tray. Warm light, warm food, and a safe place to sit. For now, that was enough. But Ethan Whitmore had the strange feeling that this quiet night was only the beginning of something much larger. Loretta Brooks spent the next 3 hours moving through the 12th floor of the Whitmore Grand with the practiced rhythm of a woman who had long ago learned how to keep her hands working while her mind carried other burdens. Fresh towels on the rack, pillow seams straight, bathroom mirror polished until the room no longer showed the people who had passed through it, only the shine they expected to find. She pushed the housekeeping cart from one suite to the next, her rubber-soled shoes whispering over the carpet, her body following habits so old they no longer required thought. But that night, thought would not leave her alone. Every few minutes, her mind slipped back downstairs to the lobby, to Annie sitting under a lamp in one of those deep upholstered chairs, to the sight of Ethan Whitmore standing beside her daughter, listening as if a 6-year-old girl's fear of the dark deserved the same attention he might give a boardroom full of executives, to the shame that had risen hot and sharp in her throat when she realized how much Annie had told him. The electricity, the hallway, the man on the stairs. Loretta tightened her jaw and stripped a king bed with more force than necessary. She hated being seen that way. It was one thing to live close to the edge. Plenty of people did. In cities like this, you could walk past 10 struggling souls in a single block and never know how thin the ground beneath them really was. But it was another thing entirely to have the edge named out loud in a place built on polished surfaces and quiet luxury. It was another thing to stand in front of the owner of the hotel where you cleaned rooms for a living and have your child explain, with painful simplicity, that home was dark because you had not been able to keep the lights on. Loretta? She looked up. Marisol Vega stood in the doorway of the suite, one hand resting on the frame, the other holding a clipboard against her hip. She was in her late 40s, compact and steady, with a face that rarely wasted expression. As housekeeping supervisor, Marisol had the habit of speaking in short, useful sentences and expecting the same in return. Yes, ma'am. Marisol took 2 steps into the room and lowered her voice. You all right? It was a question Loretta had learned to fear. People usually asked it when they already suspected the answer. I'm fine, she said automatically. Marisol studied her for a moment. That man downstairs, Mr. Whitmore, he called for you personally. I know. That usually doesn't happen. Loretta folded the fitted sheet into a neat bundle and set it into the cart. I know. Marisol did not move. Your little girl okay? The question cut in a different place. Loretta paused, then nodded. Yes. She got scared about going back to the apartment. Marisol's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to show she was listening now with more than managerial concern. Because of the electricity? Loretta looked at her. The news, apparently, had already begun to move in that quiet hotel way, never loudly, never with open gossip, but along the invisible wires of staff awareness. A clerk heard a name. A guard mentioned a child. A kitchen runner carried hot food to a girl by the fireplace. Before long, the people who kept a building running knew more than they let on. Loretta pressed her lips together. Yeah. Marisol glanced toward the door, then back at her. Why didn't you say something? Loretta let out a small breath that held no amusement. And say what? That I needed my paycheck to come faster? That I couldn't afford a sitter this week? That my kid was sitting in a hotel lobby because going home felt worse? Marisol said nothing. Loretta shook her head and pulled a clean duvet from the cart. People got their own problems. I came to work. That was the plan. For the first time that night, something in Marisol's face softened in a way Loretta had rarely seen. Still, she said, you could have told me. Loretta fitted one corner of the duvet over the comforter and looked down at her hands. I'm telling you now. Marisol gave a short nod, the kind older women sometimes gave when they understood there was no point pressing a bruise that was already showing. Well, she said, Mr. Whitmore told the kitchen to keep something hot for your girl if she wants more later. Loretta stopped. He did? Marisol nodded. And if Davis gives her trouble again, that'll be the end of that. For a moment, Loretta did not trust herself to answer. She had gone years accepting the kind of help that came disguised as inconvenience, pity, or correction. The kind that reminded you, even while offering relief, that someone else now got to decide how grateful you should be. This felt different. It unsettled her more. Thank you, she said finally. Marisol glanced at the bed, then at Loretta. Finish this floor. I'll take the last 2 rooms. Loretta frowned. You don't have to do that. I know, Marisol said. I'm doing it anyway. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, go down and check on Annie when you're done with this one. And just like that, she was gone. Loretta stood still for a long second in the center of the suite. Outside the tall windows, the city glowed in scattered points against the dark. Traffic lights, office towers, apartment windows where dinners had been cooked, televisions turned on, children sent to bed under lamps their parents no longer noticed because the switch always worked when touched. She turned back to the room and finished making the bed. When she finally rode the elevator down 40 minutes later, the hotel had shifted deeper into nighttime. Fewer arrivals, softer voices, the kind of hush that made the building feel less like a business and more like a ship carrying sleeping lives through the dark. The lobby lamp still burned beside the chair near the fireplace. Annie sat there with a grilled cheese cut into neat triangles on a white plate and a mug of hot chocolate so large it looked impossible in her hands. She was nibbling carefully, as if trying to make each bite last. A napkin rested in her lap. Her feet did not reach the floor. And sitting across from her, not in a position of authority but in a chair turned slightly toward hers, was Ethan Whitmore. He was not on his phone. He was not speaking to an assistant or scanning financial reports. He was listening to Annie with the patient attention of a man who had nowhere more important to be in that moment. Loretta slowed before they noticed her. Annie was holding up one small hand, counting on her fingers. And then if the lights come back on, Mom says I can make macaroni again, she was saying. Ethan nodded solemnly. That sounds like a good plan. It's the kind in the blue box, Annie said. The best kind, he replied. That got a tiny smile out of her. Loretta felt something catch unexpectedly in her chest. Children told the truth without trying to. They revealed a household by the things they considered worth mentioning. Not vacations or toys or birthday parties. Just boxed macaroni and whether the lights might come back on soon enough to boil water for it. Then, Annie saw her. Mom! She slid down from the chair and ran to her. Loretta caught her instinctively, kneeling to fix a strand of hair behind her ear. Hey baby, I ate all my sandwich, Annie said, as if needing to prove she had behaved properly. And Mr. Whitmore said I could have more chocolate if I wanted, but I only had one. That's good. Loretta stood and faced Ethan. Sir, she said, unable. Ethan rose from his chair. I know. He said it without edge, without expectation. Loretta glanced at the plate, the mug, the folded napkin. Signs of care unsettled her, more than signs of authority ever had. Thank you, she said quietly. He gave a small nod, then looked at Annie. Your mother tells me your favorite dinner is boxed macaroni. Annie leaned against Loretta's side. Sometimes grilled cheese. A strong second choice. Annie seemed to consider that worthy of agreement. Loretta drew a breath. My shift's almost over. We'll be out of your way soon. Ethan's eyes rested on her for a moment. And then what? Loretta knew what he meant. Back to the apartment. Back to the dark hallway. Back to a night that would be longer because Annie now had a bright place to compare it to. We'll manage, she said again. This time, even to her own ears, the words sounded thinner. Ethan looked toward the windows, where the dark city reflected faintly in the glass. Miss Brooks, he said, his voice calm. A child should not have to choose between darkness and fear. Loretta's fingers tightened over Annie's shoulder. He continued before she could answer. There are empty rooms in this hotel tonight. Her eyes lifted to his fully then. No, she said at once. Sir, I couldn't. You could. I can't accept that. He did not argue immediately. He had the discipline to let silence do its work. Loretta lowered her voice. I work here. Yes, people will talk. Let them, he said. She shook her head. It's not that simple. No, he said. It usually isn't. Annie looked between them, sensing something important was happening, though not yet understanding its shape. Ethan's tone remained even. You said your paycheck comes in a few days. You said the electricity can be restored once the bill is paid. Loretta did not answer. I'm not offering you charity, he said. I'm offering your daughter one safe night with the lights on. That landed differently, because he had said daughter, not you. Because he had said safe, not comfortable. Because something in his voice made it clear he understood the distinction between helping and humiliating. Loretta looked down at Annie. The child's face was tired now. The hotel's warm light had taken some of the strain out of it, but not all. 6-year-olds were not meant to stay awake measuring adult decisions. Mom? Annie asked, softly. Loretta closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them again, she said the words with visible effort. Just tonight? Just tonight, Ethan said, though something in his expression suggested he was already thinking beyond it. Loretta nodded once. Annie's fingers curled more tightly into her mother's hand. Not with excitement exactly, but with relief so deep it almost looked like disbelief. Ethan turned to the front desk and gave a quiet instruction. A room would be prepared. Simple, quiet, nothing extravagant. Someone from housekeeping would bring up fresh towels. The kitchen would send milk for Annie and coffee for Loretta in the morning. The hotel moved at once, because that was what hotels did when someone with authority spoke. Doors opened, keys were made, beds waited in rooms no one had claimed. But as Loretta stood there under the warm chandeliers, Annie pressed against her side, and Ethan Whitmore calmly arranged a place for them to sleep. She realized authority did not always have to sound cold. Sometimes it sounded like a door staying open for the right person. The room they gave Loretta and Annie was on the 6th floor. It wasn't one of the large suites facing the river or the corner rooms business travelers paid extra for. It was a standard guest room, clean, quiet, with 2 neatly made beds, soft lamps beside each nightstand, and curtains drawn halfway across the tall window. But to Annie, it might as well have been another world. She stood just inside the doorway while Loretta held the keycard in her hand, still uncertain whether she should step fully into the room. The carpet felt thick under their shoes. The air smelled faintly of fresh laundry and the lemon polish used on the furniture. Annie looked up at the ceiling light. It was on, not flickering, not dim, just steady and warm. Mom, she whispered. Loretta set her small overnight bag on the dresser and turned toward her. Yes, sweetheart. Are we really allowed to stay here? Loretta glanced toward the door as if expecting someone to step in and say the whole thing had been a mistake. Yes, she said quietly. Just for tonight. Annie walked slowly into the room, her steps careful like someone visiting a museum where everything might break if touched too hard. She ran her fingers lightly across the bedspread and looked at the lamp beside it. Can I turn it off and on? She asked. Loretta smiled faintly. Go ahead. Annie pressed the switch. The lamp clicked off. She waited a second, then clicked it back on. The warm glow returned instantly. The little girl smiled, a small private smile, like someone confirming a secret promise. Loretta watched her for a moment before sitting down on the edge of the bed. Her body suddenly felt heavier than it had all night. When the elevator doors had closed behind them and the hallway had grown quiet, the weight of the day seemed to settle into her shoulders all at once. 3 hours earlier, she had been scrubbing a bathroom floor, wondering how long Annie could sit in a staff break room before someone asked questions. Now they were standing in a hotel room owned by the man whose name was on the building. Life had a strange way of turning corners without warning. Annie climbed onto the bed and bounced once before stopping herself. I won't mess it up, she said quickly. You're allowed to sit on it, Loretta said. Annie sat cross-legged and looked around again. Do you think Mr. Whitmore lives here too? Loretta shook her head. No, he has houses. Big ones? I imagine so. Annie nodded thoughtfully. He's nice. Loretta did not answer immediately. She had met plenty of wealthy people during her years working in hotels. Some were polite, some were careless. Some looked through you as if you were part of the wallpaper. But Ethan Whitmore had listened, not quickly, not impatiently. He had simply listened, and that made her uneasy in a way she couldn't quite explain. A soft knock sounded at the door. Loretta stood immediately. When she opened it, a young hotel attendant stood outside pushing a small service cart. "Evening, ma'am," he said kindly. "Mr. Whitmore asked that we bring this up." He lifted a covered tray from the cart and placed it on the small table near the window. "Milk for the little one," he said with a smile toward Annie. "And coffee for you in the morning if you want it." Loretta blinked. "That's very kind." He nodded politely and left as quietly as he had arrived. Annie slid off the bed and hurried over to the table. There was a glass of milk, a small plate of cookies, and a folded napkin. "Cookies," Annie breathed. Loretta laughed softly for the first time that night. "Looks like it." Annie took one carefully. "Do you want one?" "No, honey. You should," Annie said. "You worked all day." Loretta leaned against the table and accepted the cookie. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the windows, the city hummed softly with distant traffic and the glow of streetlights stretching toward the river. Inside the room, the lights stayed steady. No buzzing, no darkness waiting behind the switch. Annie finished her cookie and climbed back onto the bed. "Mom?" "Yes?" "When the lights come back at home, do you think everything will go back to normal?" Loretta thought about the question. Normal. For them, normal meant rent paid just late enough to keep the landlord impatient. Grocery shopping done carefully, always calculating how many meals could come from a single bag, working nights and sleeping in pieces between school drop-offs and laundry. But normal also meant Annie's laughter in the kitchen, macaroni boiling on the stove, movie nights on the couch with blankets and popcorn. Normal was not always easy, but it was theirs. "Yes," Loretta said finally. "Everything will be all right." Annie lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. Mr. Whitmore said something downstairs. "What did he say?" "That kids shouldn't have to be scared of the dark." Loretta's throat tightened slightly. "He's right," she said. Annie turned her head. "Do you think he was scared of the dark when he was little?" Loretta smiled gently. "Everyone is, at some point." Annie seemed satisfied with that answer. Within minutes, the long day finally caught up with her. Her eyelids grew heavy, and her breathing slowed, until the small room filled with the soft rhythm of a sleeping child. Loretta pulled the blanket up around her shoulders and turned off the overhead light, leaving only the bedside lamp glowing softly. She sat there for a while, listening, waiting, almost expecting the world to interrupt the quiet again. But the room stayed calm. After a while, she walked to the window. 6 floors below, the lobby lights of the Whitmore Grand shone through the glass doors. Staff moved quietly behind the front desk. A late guest stepped through the revolving door pulling a suitcase, and standing near the entrance, speaking briefly with the night manager, was Ethan Whitmore. Even from this distance, Loretta could recognize him by the stillness in the way he carried himself. He looked up once, toward the rows of lit windows above the lobby. For a brief second, she wondered if he knew exactly which one belonged to them. Then he turned, said something to the manager, and walked out into the cold city night. Loretta watched the door close behind him. For the first time in weeks, the tight knot of worry inside her chest loosened slightly, not because their problems were solved, but because tonight, at least, Annie was sleeping in a room where the lights stayed on. And sometimes, Loretta thought, that was enough to begin again. Morning came softly in room 614. Not all at once, not with the rude certainty of an alarm clock or the sharp glare of daylight through thin curtains. But slowly, as if the room itself understood that rest was something precious and easily frightened away. A pale wash of dawn pressed through the edges of the drapes. The lamp beside Annie's bed was still on, casting a small circle of gold over the nightstand and the folded napkin where a single cookie crumb remained. Loretta Brooks was already awake. She had not slept deeply. Women who spent too many years balancing rent, bills, schedules, and fear rarely did. Even in a clean hotel bed with fresh sheets tucked tight beneath her legs, some part of her body had remained alert, listening for the sound of trouble finding its way to the door. But sometime around 3 in the morning, exhaustion had won the argument, and she had drifted into the first unbroken sleep she could remember in weeks. Now she sat on the edge of the bed, still in yesterday's t-shirt, holding her phone in both hands. The screen was cracked at one corner. The battery sat at 19%. And on the screen, bright and merciless even in the softened morning light, was the overdue electric bill. She had opened it 3 times already. Balance due, past due amount, final notice, service interrupted. The words did not change no matter how long she looked at them. They remained what they were. Proof that effort and outcome did not always travel together in this country. She had worked. She had shown up. She had cleaned rooms until her back ached and her knees throbbed and her hands smelled faintly of bleach no matter how much soap she used. Still, the lights in her apartment had gone dark. Behind her, Annie shifted under the blanket. Loretta locked the phone and set it aside before her daughter could see the bill on the screen. Annie opened her eyes slowly, blinking up at the ceiling as if she needed a second to remember where she was. Then she smiled. "Are the lights still on?" she whispered. Loretta turned and looked at the lamp. "Yes, baby." Annie pushed herself upright and looked around the room, reassured all over again by the soft brightness, the white bedding, the little tray still sitting by the window. "We really stayed here. We really did." Annie swung her legs over the side of the bed. "Can I wash my face in that bathroom again?" Loretta laughed under her breath. "You can wash your face in that bathroom all you want before we leave." Before we leave, the words came naturally, but they sat heavily between them. Annie slipped off the bed and padded toward the bathroom. When she disappeared inside, Loretta picked up her phone again and stared at the dark screen. She did not know what came next. Gratitude was easy enough to feel. She felt it in every quiet corner of that room. In the heat that had stayed on all night. In the way Annie had slept without waking, scared. In the fact that someone had brought milk and cookies to a child who had asked for nothing except a place where the lights worked. But gratitude was not the same thing as a plan. By noon, she would have to decide whether to tell the utility company to give her 2 more days. By evening, she would have to figure out after-school care again for Annie if she was going to keep taking night shifts. By next week, rent would be staring her in the face like another test she could not afford to fail. There was a knock at the door. Loretta stood quickly, smoothing a hand over her shirt before opening it. A hotel server in a pressed uniform stood outside with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, ma'am," he said. "Breakfast for Miss Brooks and her daughter." Loretta blinked. "I didn't order breakfast." Mr. Whitmore did. He wheeled the tray inside and set it neatly on the table by the window. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, orange juice for Annie, coffee for Loretta, hot enough that steam rose gently from the lid. The server gave her a respectful nod and left without asking for a signature, without lingering long enough to make her feel observed. Loretta stood still after the door closed. Annie emerged from the bathroom, face damp, curls at her forehead darkened with water. She stopped at the sight of the tray. "Oh," she breathed. "That's for us?" Loretta swallowed. "Looks like it." Annie climbed into the chair by the table and stared at the plate in front of her like someone afraid the food might vanish if she blinked too hard. "Can I eat the strawberries first?" "Yes." Annie picked up one carefully and bit into it. Juice shone on her lower lip. She smiled in that open, unguarded way children only did when something simple had gone exactly right. Loretta sat across from her and wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. It was stronger than what she usually made at home. Smoother, too. Real hotel coffee. Not the bargain can from the corner store. She took one sip and felt something dangerously close to tears press at the back of her throat. It wasn't the taste of the coffee. It was what it meant to sit down and drink it while it was still hot. Annie chewed, then looked up. "Do you think Mr. Whitmore eats breakfast like this every day?" Loretta managed a faint smile. "Probably not exactly this. Do rich people eat strawberries all the time?" "I don't know, honey." "I would," Annie said with great seriousness. "If I was rich, I'd eat strawberries and grilled cheese." Loretta laughed softly, and this time the laugh stayed a little longer. There was another knock at the door just as Annie reached for a second piece of toast. Loretta's shoulders tightened instantly. Old instincts. Bad news often knocked politely before entering. She opened the door to find Claire Benson standing there. Claire was in her early 50s, elegant without trying too hard. The kind of woman who wore a navy suit like it had been made for her and spoke in the calm, measured tone of someone used to solving problems before they grew sharp edges. Loretta knew who she was, of course. Everyone did. Director of Operations. A woman whose approval mattered all through the building. "Miss Brooks," Claire said, offering a small professional smile. "Good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting." "No, ma'am." Claire glanced past Loretta and saw Annie at the table. Her expression softened by a fraction. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to check on you both." Loretta's grip tightened slightly on the door handle. "That's kind of him," Claire nodded. "He also asked me to let you know you're not expected on shift tonight." Loretta stared at her. "What?" "You'll be paid for the missed hours," Claire said calmly. "Consider it emergency administrative leave." Loretta's first reaction was not relief. It was alarm. "No, I can work," she said quickly. "I'm fine to work." "I'm sure you are. I don't want special treatment." Claire held her gaze with the patience of a woman who had heard similar words from proud people before. "This isn't about special treatment," she said. "It's about making sure you have one day to breathe." Loretta looked away. From inside the room, Annie said brightly, "There are strawberries." Claire smiled. "So I see." Then she looked back at Loretta. "Mr. Whitmore would like to speak with you this morning, after breakfast." Nothing formal. He asked if 10 o'clock would be all right. Loretta's mind went immediately to trouble, then to policy, then to every way help could quietly become debt. "What about?" Claire did not answer right away. "I think," she said carefully, "he wants to ask you a few questions about your work here, and about what you need." Loretta almost laughed, though there was no humor in it. Need was such a dangerous word. People with money liked to ask it when they wanted to feel generous. Employers liked to avoid it when the answer cost them anything. Claire seemed to read some of that in her face. "You don't have to be afraid," she said quietly. Loretta met her eyes. "I'm not afraid." Claire gave a small, knowing nod that suggested she would not insult her by pretending that was true. 10 o'clock then? After a long moment, Loretta said, "Yes, ma'am." Claire handed her a room service card with an extension written neatly on the back. "If you need anything before then, call this number." She turned to go, then paused. "One more thing, Miss Brooks." Loretta waited. "The room is yours until tonight. No one is rushing you out." The sentence landed with surprising force. No one is rushing you out. There were people in this world who had never had to think about the violence hidden inside being hurried, the humiliation of being moved along before you had regained your footing, the panic of knowing that every kindness came with a time limit you did not control. Loretta nodded once. "Thank you." When Claire had gone, she closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. Annie looked at her over the rim of her orange juice glass. "Mom?" "Yes. Are we in trouble now?" Loretta crossed the room and knelt beside her daughter's chair. "No, baby." "Then why do you look scared?" "Children. Always cutting clean through whatever mask an adult tried to put on." Loretta brushed a thumb lightly across Annie's cheek. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "when life changes all at once, it takes a minute to figure out if it's changing for the better." Annie thought about that very seriously. Then she nodded and offered her mother half a strawberry. Loretta took it. At 10 o'clock, she would sit down with Ethan Whitmore and find out what kind of man listened to a little girl in a hotel lobby and then kept listening the next morning. At exactly 10 o'clock, Loretta Brooks stood outside the executive office on the second floor of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. She had worked in the building for almost 4 years, yet she had never been in this hallway before. The carpet here was thicker than the guest floors. The walls held framed photographs of the hotel's history, black and white images of the building during construction, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, men in suits shaking hands beside brass plaques. Places like this were not meant for the housekeeping staff. Loretta smoothed the front of her blouse again, even though she had already done it 3 times since stepping out of the elevator. Behind her, Annie stood quietly holding her hand. "Mom," Annie whispered, looking down the long hallway. "Is this where the bosses work?" "Yes." "Do they live here too?" Loretta almost smiled. "No, sweetheart." A receptionist seated behind a curved wooden desk looked up. "You must be Miss Brooks." Loretta nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Whitmore is expecting you." The woman stood and gently opened the office door. "Right this way." Loretta took a slow breath and stepped inside. The office was large but not flashy. A wall of windows looked out across the city skyline where the morning sun reflected off glass towers and steel bridges. Bookshelves lined one side of the room, filled with binders and framed photographs. A long desk sat near the center. But Ethan Whitmore was not sitting behind it. He stood near the windows, reading something on a tablet. When he saw them enter, he set it aside. "Good morning, Annie." The girl brightened immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." His eyes shifted to Loretta. "Miss Brooks." "Sir." His voice remained calm and steady. "Thank you for coming." Loretta hesitated slightly before speaking. "Your assistant said you wanted to talk." "Yes." He gestured toward 2 chairs arranged near a small round table rather than toward the large desk. "Please sit." That small choice eased something in Loretta's chest. Sitting across a table felt like a conversation. Sitting across a desk would have felt like judgment. Annie climbed carefully into the chair beside her mother. Ethan sat across from them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then he looked at Annie. "How were the strawberries this morning?" Her face lit up. "They were really good." "I'm glad." She hesitated before asking the question that had clearly been waiting in her mind. "Do you eat strawberries every day?" Ethan chuckled quietly. "Not nearly as often as you think." Annie nodded seriously, as if filing away the information. Loretta cleared her throat. Sir, if this is about last night, I truly appreciate what you did. Ethan looked at her. But, she hesitated, I don't want this to affect my job. There it was, the fear she had carried into the room. Ethan leaned back slightly. It won't. Loretta searched his face to see if he meant it. I work hard, she said carefully. I show up early. I don't complain. I'm aware. You are. He nodded once. You've been on the housekeeping team 3 years and 8 months. Your supervisors describe you as reliable, fast, and thorough. Loretta blinked. You know that? I make it a habit to know who works in my buildings. Annie looked between them, impressed. Mom cleans really fast, she added helpfully. Ethan smiled faintly. I believe it. Then he turned back to Loretta. What happened with the electricity? The question came calmly, without accusation. Loretta exhaled slowly. Ours got cut 2 months ago when the conference bookings dropped. I fell behind on the bill. And now, my paycheck clears Friday. And the amount owed? $342. She hated saying the number out loud. It sounded embarrassingly small compared to the money that moved through a place like this. Ethan nodded slightly, as if noting a simple fact. After that, the lights come back on. Silence settled briefly. Then Ethan looked toward Annie. Do you like living near the hotel? The girl shrugged. It's okay. What do you like about it? There's a park 2 blocks away. And what don't you like? Annie glanced at her mother before answering. It's dark at night. Loretta felt the familiar knot return to her chest. Ethan noticed. He spoke gently. Miss Brooks, may I ask you something directly? Yes. Why didn't you tell anyone here that you were struggling? Loretta looked down at her hands. Because it's not anyone else's responsibility. That's one way to see it. It's the only way I know. He studied her quietly. Pride, dignity, fear of being pitied. He had seen it many times before. My mother used to say something similar, he said after a moment. Loretta looked up. She worked 2 jobs, he continued. Raised 3 kids alone. She hated asking for help. What changed? She got sick. Loretta didn't respond. And when people finally tried to help, he added, it was already too late. The room grew still. Annie listened quietly, though she didn't fully understand. Ethan folded his hands on the table. I'm not interested in charity, he said calmly. Loretta waited. I am interested in good employees. She frowned slightly. And you are one. The statement landed heavier than she expected. You show up, he continued. You work hard. You take care of your daughter. He gestured lightly toward Annie. That matters. Loretta swallowed. So what does that mean? Ethan reached into a folder on the table. He slid a paper across toward her. This means I'm offering you a different position. Loretta stared at the paper. Front of house guest services assistant. She read quietly. Her eyebrows lifted. That's not housekeeping. No. It pays more. Yes. Why? Because you're capable of it. She shook her head slowly. I've never worked a desk job. You can learn. Her eyes moved across the page again. And the hours? Day shifts. Loretta looked up sharply. Day. That way Annie isn't waiting alone at night. The room felt suddenly very quiet. Annie looked confused but hopeful. Loretta's voice dropped. Sir, why are you doing this? Ethan didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said the simplest truth. Because last night a 6-year-old girl asked me if she could stay somewhere with the lights on. Loretta's throat tightened. And because, he continued calmly, a hotel that prides itself on hospitality should probably extend it to the people who work inside it. Annie looked at her mother. Mom, does that mean we get lights again? Loretta blinked rapidly. Yes, she whispered. Then she looked at Ethan. I don't know how to thank you. He shook his head. You don't need to. He stood. Just do the job well. Annie slid down from her chair. Mom does everything well. Ethan smiled slightly. I believe that. Loretta held the paper in her hands. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't look like a hallway with the lights turned off. It looked like a door slowly opening. And this time, someone had left it unlocked. Loretta did not sign the paper right away. She read it once, then again more slowly, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something smaller, something closer to what life had taught her to expect. Front of house guest services assistant, full-time, day shift rotation, training period included, benefits after probation, wage increase. The letters were clear enough. It was her own belief in them that lagged behind. Annie leaned against her mother's arm and looked up at the page as if she, too, were trying to read a future into it. Is that your new job? She asked. Loretta let out a small breath. Maybe. Ethan Whitmore remained standing near the window, giving her space without leaving the moment entirely. It was a practiced sort of restraint. He did not hover. He did not press. He had likely spent years learning that people accepted life-changing things more honestly when they were not crowded by the person offering them. Still, Loretta felt the weight of the paper in her hands as if it were heavier than it should have been. "I don't understand," she said at last. Ethan looked at her. "I think you do." "No," she said, more quietly than before. "I understand the words. I don't understand why this is happening to me." It was not ingratitude. It was bewilderment, plain and unadorned. He walked back toward the small round table and rested one hand lightly on the back of the empty chair. "Claire brought me your personnel file this morning," he said. "And your supervisor's notes." Loretta's fingers tightened slightly on the paper. "I didn't know there were notes. There always are." That almost made Annie smile, though she did not entirely know why. Ethan continued. "You've covered extra shifts. You've trained new hires without being asked. You've had multiple positive mentions from guests, even from people who didn't know your name and described you only as the woman who helped my mother when she slipped in the hall, or the housekeeper who found my son's inhaler." Loretta blinked. "I remember the inhaler," she said softly. "I imagine you do." He sat down again, not opposite her in a confrontational way but slightly to one side, as if to make the conversation feel less like an interview and more like a truth finally arriving where it was supposed to. "There are people in every company," he said, "who do more than the title they're given. Sometimes that gets noticed. Sometimes it doesn't. In your case, it should have." Loretta lowered her gaze to the page again. In her experience, being good at your job usually earned you more of the same job. More rooms, more carts, more hours no one else wanted, more responsibility without the courtesy of a raise large enough to change what was waiting at home. She had never expected it to earn a door into another part of the building. "But front desk work," she said. "Guest services, that's different." "Yes, I don't have the clothes for that kind of job. We provide uniforms. I haven't done that kind of computer work in years. We train." She looked up. "And if I'm not good at it?" Ethan's answer came without delay. "Then we'll know after proper training, not before." That silenced her for a moment. He turned to Annie. "Do you know what training means?" Annie thought carefully. "It means somebody shows you first." "That's right." She nodded as if pleased to have gotten it correct, then turned to her mother. "You show me things first too." Loretta smiled faintly despite herself. "I do." Annie looked back at Ethan. "So you're going to show Mom the new job first?" "In a manner of speaking, yes. That seems fair," Annie said. The adults looked at her, and for one brief second the tension in the room loosened. Then Loretta's expression sobered again. "People are going to talk," she said. Ethan did not pretend not to know what she meant. Hotels had their own ecosystem of rumor, judgment, sympathy, resentment, all moving invisibly beneath polite surfaces. "Yes," he said. "Some will. They'll say I got pulled upstairs because my little girl asked for help in the lobby." He held her gaze. "And?" Loretta's chin lifted slightly, and now there was steel under the exhaustion. "And I don't want my daughter growing up thinking the only way people like us get seen is by being desperate in front of the right rich man." The honesty of it settled hard and clean in the room. Annie, sensing something serious, grew still. Ethan nodded once. "That's a fair concern." Loretta waited. He folded his hands. "Then, let me answer it clearly. I did not offer you this position because your daughter made me feel sorry for you." She said nothing. "I offered it because after she spoke to me, I looked more closely. And when I looked more closely, I found an employee who should have been moved up already." Loretta's breathing slowed. "There's a difference," he said. "One is pity, the other is correction." The word correction stayed with her. Not rescue, not favor, not generosity so large it required her gratitude forever. Correction. Annie looked from one adult to the other. "What's correction?" she asked. Loretta opened her mouth, but Ethan answered first. "It means fixing something that should have been made right a long time ago." Annie considered this gravely, then nodded. "Like when Mom fixes the hem on my school skirt because it curls up funny." A soft sound escaped Loretta. Half laugh, half sigh. Something like that. Ethan glanced toward the city beyond the window. The late morning light was brighter now, showing every line of the bridges, every rooftop, every narrow grid of streets where people were already late for things that felt important. Then he looked back at Loretta. "Tell me about community college." She looked startled. "What?" The certificate program. Operations and hospitality support. Her eyes narrowed slightly. That was in my file too? No. Claire found it when she called to verify your previous coursework. Loretta stared. You called the college? I had someone do it. Why? Because if I'm moving someone into a new role, I like to know what's already there. For a moment, she did not seem to know whether to be offended or touched. I only finished 3 semesters, she said. Then Annie came along. There was no bitterness in the statement, just sequence. Life had turned. She had followed. You were doing well in the program, Ethan said. I liked it. Why'd you stop? She gave him a look that suggested the answer should have been obvious. Childcare. Rent. Work. There are only so many hours in a day. Yes, he said quietly. There are. Annie reached for her mother's hand. Loretta took it without looking away from Ethan. I used to think, Loretta said after a moment, if I just worked harder, everything would eventually line up. Bills, school, time. I kept thinking the next month would be the month it got easier. Her voice did not crack. It didn't need to. The steadiness was sadder than tears. And then years pass, she said. And you realize hard work and breathing room are not the same thing. Something in Ethan's expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough to show that he knew she had named a truth bigger than herself. No, he said. They aren't. The receptionist knocked lightly and opened the office door just enough to ask whether Mr. Whitmore still wanted the 11:30 call held. He said yes without taking his eyes off Loretta. The door closed again. Life waited for him constantly. That, too, she noticed. Yet, he was still here. What exactly would this new job be? She asked, looking down at the paper once more. Day to day. The question pleased him, though he did not show it beyond the slightest easing at the corners of his mouth, checking in guests when needed, assisting with reservations changes, helping coordinate requests between the front desk and housekeeping, solving small problems before they become big ones, making people feel seen without making a performance of it. Loretta looked up at that last part. That sounds like something my grandmother used to say, she murmured. What? She'd say, good manners aren't about making a show of kindness. They're about making room for somebody else's dignity. Ethan was silent for a beat. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Annie brightened. Grandma Lou made sweet potato pie. Loretta smiled. Yes, she did. Better than store pie. Much better. The office held that tiny warmth for a second. And then, the future returned. When would training start? Loretta asked. Tomorrow, if you accept. Her head came up. Tomorrow? Yes. That fast? You need the pay adjustment as soon as possible, and I'd rather not pretend urgency isn't part of this. There it was again, that refusal to dress reality in softer fabric than it deserved. Annie swung her legs slowly beneath the chair. If Mom works in the daytime, can she pick me up from school? Loretta looked at her, and something almost painful moved through her face. That's the idea, Ethan said gently. Annie's eyes widened with hope so innocent it made Loretta look away for a second. She remembered too many evenings asking neighbors for 20 extra minutes, too many rushed pickups, too many nights walking home with Annie half asleep and shivering, trying not to think about who might be sitting in the stairwell this time. A day shift. A real one, not the patchwork survival she had been calling a life. I'd still need after-school coverage sometimes, she said, now thinking aloud in spite of herself. On the longer shifts and school breaks, Claire can help connect you with the Employee Assistance Program, Ethan said. There are child care partnerships, discounted rates, transportation options in some cases. Loretta stared at him. These things exist? In this company? Yes. Then why didn't anybody tell me? He did not answer immediately. Because the true answer was ugly in an ordinary way. Because companies often created systems that looked generous in handbooks and invisible in practice. Because people lower down the ladder were expected to find what they needed while already too tired to search. When he finally spoke, his voice had turned quieter. Because institutions are often much better at having help than at offering it. Loretta let out a breath through her nose. That sounds about right. Day. The paper trembled slightly in her hand, and only then did she realize how tightly she had been holding it. I'm scared, she admitted. It was the first time she had said the words plainly. Ethan nodded, as if they were not shameful, only accurate. I know. I haven't done anything new in a long time. Then perhaps you're overdue. Annie leaned against her mother's arm again. You should say yes. Loretta looked down at her. You think so? Yes. Annie paused. Because you look different when they talk to you about this. How do I look? The girl thought carefully. Taller. That nearly undid her. Loretta laughed once, but tears burned unexpectedly at the backs of her eyes. She blinked them away before Annie could notice. Then she lifted the paper, looked at the line for signature, and reached for the pen Ethan slid across the table. Her hand hovered for just one moment, not because she did not want it, because wanting something good after too many years of scraping by could feel more dangerous than not wanting it at all. Then she signed. Loretta Brooks. The name looked almost unfamiliar there, placed beneath an offer instead of a warning, a bill, or a policy acknowledgement. Ethan took the paper back and glanced at the signature. Good. That was all he said. No dramatic congratulations, no self-satisfied speech, just good, as if the thing had always been waiting to become official and now finally was. Annie smiled broadly. Does that mean it's real? Loretta looked at her daughter and, for the first time in a long while, let herself answer without caution. Yes, baby, she said. It's real. The elevator ride down from the executive floor felt longer than it actually was. Loretta stood quietly beside Annie while the mirrored walls reflected their small figures again and again. For years she had ridden elevators in this hotel pushing a housekeeping cart, her uniform smelling faintly of detergent and floor cleaner. She had always kept her eyes low, stepping out quickly so guests could pass first. This time her hands were empty. The signed paper rested carefully inside the folder Claire had given her. Mom, Annie whispered, staring at the elevator buttons lighting up one by one as they descended. Does this mean you're one of the bosses now? Loretta laughed softly. No, sweetheart, not even close. But you work upstairs. That doesn't make me a boss. The elevator doors slid open into the bright lobby. The same marble floors, the same tall windows, the same chairs beside the fireplace where Annie had sat the night before asking a stranger if she could stay somewhere with the lights on. Only now everything looked a little different. Not richer, not grander, just possible. Annie noticed it too. That's where I sat, she said, pointing toward the chair near the lamp. Loretta followed her finger. Yes, and that's where Mr. Whitmore was standing. Yes. Annie studied the chair thoughtfully. I was really scared last night. Loretta squeezed her hand. I know. But now it doesn't feel scary anymore. That's because the lights are on, Loretta said gently. A few hotel guests walked through the lobby pulling suitcases. The quiet rhythm of the building continued as it always had front desk phones ringing softly, a bellman helping an elderly couple with luggage, the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the restaurant. Except now Loretta noticed something she had never allowed herself to notice before. People, not guests, workers. A porter pushing a linen cart down the hallway. A concierge answering a question for a confused traveler. Two housekeepers stepping out of the elevator whispering to each other in Spanish before beginning their shift. For the first time, she wondered how many of them were carrying the same quiet burdens she had been carrying. Claire Benson approached from the front desk. Miss Brooks, she said warmly. Loretta straightened slightly. Yes, ma'am. Claire smiled at Annie first. And how are you this morning? I had strawberries, Annie said proudly. Claire nodded as if this were very important news. I heard about that. Then she looked at Loretta. I spoke with Mr. Whitmore. Loretta held the folder a little tighter. Yes. Claire gestured toward the reception desk. Would you like to see where you'll be working? The question made Loretta pause. She had passed that desk thousands of times without imagining herself behind it. Yes, she said quietly. Claire guided them across the lobby. The front desk area was larger than it looked from a distance. Computer monitors glowed softly behind the counter. Phones blinked with waiting messages. A stack of arrival folders sat neatly arranged beside the keyboard. This, Claire said, is where you'll start training tomorrow morning. Loretta stepped behind the desk carefully. The view from here was different. From this angle, she could see the entire lobby, the entrance doors, the elevators, the lounge area, even the chair near the fireplace. She felt Annie's small hand tug her sleeve. You look like you belong there, the girl said. Loretta shook her head slightly. I'll need practice. That's what training is, Annie reminded her. Claire smiled. She's right. Claire reached over and tapped the keyboard. One of the most important parts of this job, she explained, is seeing what people need before they ask for it. Loretta nodded slowly. That sounds familiar. It should, Claire said. Good housekeepers already know how to do that. Loretta thought about that. Years of noticing small details, a towel folded wrong, a guest coughing in the hallway, a suitcase struggling over carpet. All those quiet instincts suddenly made sense in a new way. Across the lobby, Mr. Davis, the night security guard, walked past the entrance. He stopped when he saw Annie. "Well now," he said with a grin. "Looks like someone's back." Annie smiled shyly. "Hi." Mr. Davis nodded toward Loretta. "Everything all right?" Loretta gave a small nod. "Yes, everything's all right." Mr. Davis glanced at Claire, then back at Loretta, clearly sensing something had changed. "Well," he said, "that's good to hear." He continued toward the door. Annie leaned on the counter. "Mom?" "Yes?" "When do the lights come back at home?" Loretta hesitated. "Soon," she said. The truth was she still hadn't figured out how to pay the overdue bill. The new job would help, but the power company would not wait for future paychecks. Claire seemed to notice the flicker of worry in her face. "You'll receive an advance with your new position," Claire said quietly. Loretta looked up. "An advance?" Claire nodded. "Standard relocation adjustment for internal promotions." Loretta blinked. "But I'm not relocating." Claire's expression softened slightly. "You're relocating within the company." Loretta understood what Claire was doing. She was protecting Loretta's dignity. "No charity, just policy." "Thank you," Loretta said quietly. Claire nodded once and stepped away to answer a ringing phone. Annie rested her chin on the counter. "Mom," she whispered. "Yes?" "I think Mr. Whitmore knew you were supposed to work here." Loretta looked down at her. "What makes you say that?" "Because he listened." The answer was simple, but something about it stayed with Loretta. She looked across the lobby toward the chair by the fireplace again. Last night, a frightened little girl had asked for a place with the lights on, and somehow that small request had opened a door her mother never thought existed. Loretta straightened her shoulders. Tomorrow she would begin training. Tomorrow she would learn new systems, new responsibilities, new ways of helping people. But today she understood something that had taken years to discover. Sometimes the difference between darkness and light was not money. Sometimes it was simply whether someone stopped long enough to listen. Annie tugged her sleeve again. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Can we still make macaroni tonight when the lights come back?" Loretta smiled. "Yes, baby." This time, she believed it. Loretta's first day of training began before sunrise. She stood in the narrow space between the kitchen sink and the refrigerator in her apartment, staring for a second at the small yellow light above the stove. It was still such a simple thing. A switch. A glow. The hum of a working refrigerator. The red numbers on the microwave clock. 3 days earlier, those details had belonged to other people, to strangers in better neighborhoods, to hotel guests upstairs behind thick curtains and fresh sheets, to families whose children had never needed to ask if they could stay where the lights were on. Now the kitchen was warm again, not luxurious, not transformed into anything grand. The cabinets still sagged a little at the hinges. The floor still creaked near the doorway. The paint in the hallway outside still needed fixing, but the lights were on, and that made the whole apartment feel less like a place they were enduring and more like a place they lived. Annie sat at the table in her school uniform, stirring too much sugar into a bowl of oatmeal. "Mom," she said, "do people at the front desk have to know how to smile all day?" Loretta buttoned the cuffs of her borrowed blouse and glanced at her daughter. "I imagine it helps." Annie nodded seriously. "You already know how." Loretta almost laughed. The blouse had been left for her the previous afternoon in a garment bag with her name clipped neatly to the top. Claire had called it a temporary uniform until the rest could be fitted. Navy slacks, soft cream blouse, name tag, not fancy, just crisp, clean, and impossible to mistake for housekeeping. When Loretta had first held it in her hands, she had felt a strange jolt of grief mixed with gratitude. Grief for all the years she had spent believing no one would ever picture her in anything else. Gratitude that someone finally had. "I know how to be polite," she said. "That's smiling." "No," Loretta said, pouring coffee into a travel mug. "That's manners. Smiling is extra." Annie grinned. "Then do extra." Loretta shook her head and reached for her coat. By 7:30, she had dropped Annie at school and was walking through the employee entrance of the Whitmore Grand with the kind of careful awareness that came from entering familiar ground in an unfamiliar role. Everything felt slightly off-center. The hallway that led toward staff lockers smelled the same bleach, coffee, warm linen, somebody's floral hand lotion, but people looked at her differently now. Not all of them. Some just nodded and kept moving. Others did a quick double take at the new clothes, the new badge. The fact that Loretta Brooks from night housekeeping was not pushing a cart this morning. A young laundry attendant named Tasha smiled first. "Well, look at you," she said, warm and genuinely pleased. "Front desk now?" "Guest services," Loretta corrected gently, still not fully comfortable saying it. Tasha grinned. That's all right. Still sounds like a promotion to me. Before Loretta could answer, two other employees passed behind them. One of them, a man from maintenance she barely knew, murmured something too low to catch. The other gave a little shrug. They did not look directly at her, but they didn't need to. Loretta knew the shape of workplace whispers. She had lived near them long enough. Tasha's smile faded slightly. People talk when they don't know how to mind their own business. Loretta adjusted the strap of her purse. I figured. Tasha looked at her for a moment. You earned this. The words helped more than Loretta wanted to admit. At 8 o'clock sharp, Claire Benson met her at the front desk. You're early, Claire said. Loretta gave a small nod. I prefer it. Good. Hotels do too. Claire began with systems, logins, reservation screens, check-in procedures. The language of courtesy that sounded effortless from the other side of the desk but had a structure beneath it as specific as sheet folding or room inspections. Welcome back. Let me take care of that for you. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Thank you for your patience. By 9, Loretta understood two things. First, she could do this. Second, she was going to be more tired at the end of a day behind a computer than she had ever expected. Guest services was not easier than housekeeping. It was just a different kind of labor. Less physical, more visible. Fewer chemicals on the hands, more performance in the face. Every gesture mattered. Every word could steady or aggravate someone already annoyed from travel, jet lag, entitlement, fear, or simply being the sort of person who believed money should protect them from all discomfort. Claire walked her through the basics with brisk patience. People want two things when they come to a hotel, she said, to feel expected and to feel protected. We can't control everything, but we can control whether they believe we're paying attention. Loretta nodded. That part, she understood deeply. Paying attention had always been her skill. By mid-morning, the lobby had thickened with movement. An older couple from Ohio wanted help finding a pharmacy. A businessman had lost a charging cable. A woman in pearls complained that her suite smelled faintly of smoke even though it didn't. Loretta watched, listened, and learned. Claire eventually stepped aside and let her handle smaller interactions. She helped a gray-haired man print a boarding pass after his phone froze. She calmed a woman upset about a delayed airport shuttle. She answered a question about breakfast hours so kindly that the guest smiled before walking away. Good, Claire said under her breath after the third successful interaction. You don't overtalk. Is that bad? It is in hospitality. Nervous people explain too much. Competent people solve. Loretta stored that away. Around 11:30, the first real test arrived. A woman in an expensive camel coat swept up to the desk with a leather carry-on and the expression of someone already offended by the day. There seems to be a mistake, she said, laying a printed confirmation on the counter. I booked a Riverview King. I was given a City View double. Claire was on the phone with corporate. The concierge was helping a family from Dallas. The line behind the woman was beginning to form. Loretta took the paper and looked it over. No mistake in the system. The guest had booked through a third-party site. The category in the fine print did not guarantee Riverview. It guaranteed preferred placement based on availability. Loretta felt her pulse rise. The old version of herself, the one who spent years making rooms beautiful and then disappearing before anyone could complain about them, wanted to fetch someone else. But Claire's voice came back to her. Competent people solve. Loretta looked up. I'm sorry for the confusion, ma'am. Let me see what I can do. The woman crossed her arms. I don't want to hear what you can do. I want the room I paid for. I understand. Do you? Loretta felt the sting in that question, not because of the tone, because of what lived underneath it. The quick dismissal, the glance at her face, her skin, her name tag, as if all three had already lowered the woman's confidence in the answer. Yes, ma'am, Loretta said evenly. I do. She checked the inventory again. One Riverview King remained, held for a VIP arrival not due until evening. Protocol said do not move held inventory without approval. The line behind the woman grew longer. The woman tapped her fingernail against the counter. Well, Loretta made a decision. Mrs. Holloway, I can move you into the correct room category now, and note the adjustment personally. You'll have your Riverview within 10 minutes. The woman blinked, surprised by the certainty. Then why wasn't that done already? Because I needed to confirm it properly. Loretta printed the new key packet, called upstairs to have the luggage redirected, and offered a complimentary coffee from the cafe. while the housekeeping team gave the room a final inspection, all in under 3 minutes. Mrs. Holloway took the coffee voucher and left without thanks. Loretta exhaled only after the next guest stepped forward. When the line finally cleared, Claire hung up the phone and looked at her. "You moved the VIP hold." Loretta nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "Because the VIP isn't here for 6 more hours. Mrs. Holloway was here now, and if I left her standing there any longer, she would have taken her frustration into every review platform on the internet." Claire studied her. "And?" Loretta straightened. "And she was rude, but she was also right to be upset." A pause. Then Claire's mouth curved slightly. "Good." Loretta blinked. "Good?" "Good judgment. Risky, but correct." Claire lowered her voice. "Also, the VIP was just downgraded by his assistant to a standard king 30 minutes ago. I wanted to see if you'd noticed the opening." Loretta stared. "You were testing me?" Claire gave a tiny shrug. "Only a little." For the first time that day, Loretta laughed. It came out shorter than she meant it to, edged with relief and disbelief, but it was still laughter. Claire's expression softened. "You saw the problem clearly. More important, you didn't let her make you smaller while you solved it." That sentence stayed with Loretta all afternoon. You didn't let her make you smaller. By the time school let out and Annie came through the lobby doors holding the hand of an after-school aide Claire had arranged for the week, Loretta felt wrung out and steadier all at once. Annie hurried to the desk. "Mom, are you doing the new job?" Loretta looked down at her daughter, then at the counter, the monitors, the ringing phone, the polished brass, the whole bright machinery of a world she had once believed would never make room for her. "Yes," she said. This time there was no hesitation in it. "Yes, baby. I am." By the end of Loretta's first full day behind the front desk, the lobby of the Whitmore Grand felt different than it had that morning. Not quieter, not slower, just more familiar. The rhythm of the hotel had begun to make sense from this side of the counter. The subtle choreography of arrivals and departures. The way luggage wheels echoed differently on marble depending on how heavy the suitcase was. The tone of a guest's voice that meant they needed reassurance rather than explanation. Loretta had been paying attention to those things for years. Now she simply had permission to use what she knew. It was nearly 4:30 when the afternoon rush finally eased. Claire stepped away to speak with the concierge about a late conference group, leaving Loretta alone at the desk for a moment. The lobby sunlight had turned golden through the tall windows, stretching across the marble floor in long, warm rectangles. Annie sat at the far end of the counter with a small coloring book the concierge had given her. She looked up. "Mom?" "Yes. Do you like it?" Loretta glanced around the lobby. Guests crossed the room with quiet conversations. A bellman held the door for a couple entering from the street. The phones behind the desk blinked calmly, instead of frantically. "I do," she said. Annie smiled and returned to her drawing. Loretta was just beginning to organize the next stack of arrival folders when a man approached the desk. He was tall, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive without trying too hard. His hair had begun to gray at the temples, and his expression carried the calm impatience of someone used to being recognized. Loretta straightened automatically. "Good afternoon. Welcome to the Whitmore Grand. How may I help you?" The man studied her for a second. "I'm checking in," he said, sliding a leather ID case across the counter. Loretta opened it. Her eyes paused on the name, Daniel Harrow, the VIP reservation, the one Claire had mentioned earlier. Loretta looked up politely. "Welcome, Mr. Harrow." He gave a small nod, but his attention had already shifted toward the lobby, as if searching for someone. "I requested a Riverview King suite." "Yes, sir." She typed quickly into the system, and then she saw it. The room, the same one she had reassigned earlier that morning to Mrs. Holloway. The last Riverview King in the building. For a moment, the quiet hum of the lobby seemed to fade. Daniel Harrow leaned slightly forward. "Is there a problem?" Loretta kept her voice calm. "No problem, sir. Just a moment while I confirm your room." Behind her, the system showed the truth clearly. The Riverview King suite had been reassigned hours ago, and the next available one wouldn't open until the following day. Loretta felt the weight of the decision she had made earlier. Competent people solve, but sometimes solving one problem created another. She looked back at Mr. Harrow. "I want to be transparent with you," she said calmly. "There has been a change in room availability today." His expression tightened. "What kind of change?" Loretta met his gaze steadily. "The specific suite you reserved was reassigned earlier today due to an availability error." That wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough to protect the guest she had already helped. "And what exactly does that mean for me?" he asked. "It means," Loretta continued evenly, I'd like to offer you our executive corner suite tonight with a complimentary upgrade. Mr. Harrow frowned slightly. Corner suite? Yes, sir. He crossed his arms. That's not the Riverview I booked. No, Loretta admitted. But it's a larger suite with a panoramic city view and private lounge access. He studied her for several seconds. Behind him, Annie watched quietly from the counter. Finally, he asked, why wasn't my original room held? Loretta could feel Claire approaching from the side of the desk, but she answered before Claire spoke. Because another guest arrived earlier today with the same reservation request. That doesn't answer my question. No, Loretta said calmly. It doesn't. The man's eyes narrowed slightly. Then answer it. Loretta kept her voice steady. Because when the situation appeared this morning, the guest standing in front of me needed a solution immediately. Silence settled between them. Claire stopped a few steps away, watching carefully. Mr. Harrow looked at Loretta again. Not with anger now, with curiosity. And you gave her my room? I gave her the only available room that solved her problem. Another pause. Then something surprising happened. Mr. Harrow smiled slightly. Well, he said, that's interesting. Loretta blinked. Sir, most front desk clerks would have blamed the computer. Loretta allowed herself a small breath. I prefer honesty. Mr. Harrow leaned his elbows on the counter. What kind of problem did this other guest have? Loretta shook her head gently. I'm afraid I can't discuss other guests. His smile widened slightly. Fair enough. He picked up the room key packet she had printed. Corner suite, you said? Yes, sir. Bigger room? Yes. Private lounge? Yes. He slid the key into his pocket. Then I suppose I'll survive. Loretta nodded. Thank you for your understanding. As he turned toward the elevators, he paused and glanced back once more. You're new here? Yes, sir. I can tell. Loretta waited. Most people in this building try very hard not to make decisions. Then he walked toward the elevator without another word. Claire stepped beside Loretta. Well, she said quietly, that could have gone worse. Loretta let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. I thought I'd ruined my second day. Claire shook her head. You did the opposite. Loretta looked confused. Claire gestured toward the elevators. Daniel Harrow owns half the development projects along the river. Loretta froze. That was Daniel Harrow? Yes. And I gave away his room. Claire smiled faintly. You solved a problem. That's what we do here. Loretta leaned slightly against the desk. I need another cup of coffee. Annie slid her drawing across the counter. Mom. Loretta looked down. It was a picture of the hotel. 3 stick figures stood in front of the big doors. 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small. Above them, Annie had drawn a bright yellow sun. What's this? Loretta asked. Our new place, Annie said. Loretta smiled softly, not because the hotel was theirs, but because for the first time, the future didn't feel like a hallway with broken lights. It felt like a building full of doors, and she had just learned how to open one. By Thursday afternoon, people in the Whitmore Grand had begun telling Loretta's story in pieces, not the true story. Of course, hotels were like families in that way. They lived on fragments. A clerk saw one moment. A server heard another. A housekeeper noticed a new name tag. A bellman carried a rumor from the lobby to the service elevator and back again before the coffee in the staff room had gone cold. By now, most of the building knew 3 things. Loretta Brooks had moved out of night housekeeping. Mr. Whitmore himself had signed off on it. And something unusual had happened in the lobby a few nights ago involving her little girl. No one seemed to know exactly what, which, in a place like this, almost guaranteed that everyone would pretend they did. Loretta felt it in the small pauses that followed her name, in the looks that lasted a second too long, in the tone people used when they said congratulations and meant it, or when they said congratulations and meant something closer to luck. She was standing at the side station behind the front desk, restocking key sleeves and reorganizing the brochure rack for the 3rd time, when 2 women from banquets came around the corner, speaking softly to each other. They didn't realize she could hear them until it was too late. That's her, one of them murmured. The one with the little girl? Mm-hmm. Mr. Whitmore just handed her that job. I heard she was already being watched for promotion. I heard something different. Loretta kept her hands moving. It was not the words themselves that stung. It was the old feeling underneath them that invisible trial poor people were put through whenever anything good happened to them, as if fortune had to be audited more carefully when it crossed the wrong address. The women noticed her then, both going quiet at once. One gave an awkward half-smile. Morning, Loretta. Afternoon, Loretta corrected politely. They moved on. Claire Benson, who had heard enough to understand the shape of the exchange, walked over from the concierge station. You don't have to stand here and swallow that, she said quietly. Loretta kept the stack of brochures in her hands aligned so tightly their corners hurt. What am I supposed to do? Announce my resume? Claire folded her arms. No. But you also don't have to act like it doesn't bother you. Loretta looked up then. For a moment, the older woman's expression held something more personal than management. Not pity. Recognition. It bothers me, Loretta admitted. Good, Claire said. It should. You're not made of stone. Loretta let out a breath. I just don't want to become a story. Claire gave one short nod. Too late for that. Neither of them smiled. Across the lobby, the glass doors opened, and a gust of cold air came in with a group of conference guests. The front desk phone started ringing again. A child somewhere near the restaurant laughed too loudly, and his father shushed him in the tired voice of a man who had been traveling too long. The hotel continued, as hotels did, but the unease stayed with Loretta through the afternoon. At 3:15, Annie arrived from school. She usually came in with an after-school aide for the last hour of Loretta's shift, carrying a worksheet or a drawing or some bright, ordinary proof that childhood was still happening around the edges of all this. Usually she came in talking. That day, she didn't. Loretta noticed it immediately. Annie walked through the lobby holding the aide's hand, her small shoulders slightly hunched under her coat. She did not smile when she saw her mother behind the desk. She only gave a tiny wave and went to sit in the same chair near the fireplace she had claimed as safe from the first night. Loretta's chest tightened. Claire saw it too. Go, she said quietly. I'm on desk. I can cover for 10 minutes. Loretta did not argue. She stepped out from behind the counter and crossed the lobby as calmly as she could. Annie looked up when she approached. Hey, baby. Hi. Loretta sat in the chair beside her. How was school? Fine. It was the kind of answer only children and husbands used when they hoped not to be questioned further. Loretta waited. Annie picked at the corner of her coloring page. Did something happen? The little girl's lower lip shifted, just slightly. One of the girls in my class asked if we were poor. There it was. No dramatic music. No raised voice. Just one sentence, quiet as a pin dropping on carpet, and suddenly the whole world changed shape around it. Loretta felt something hot and immediate move through her body. Not shame, not exactly. Something older. The instinct to protect, to strike back at whatever had touched your child and made her feel lesser. But Annie was watching her face, so Loretta made herself breathe first. What did you say? She asked gently. Annie shrugged. I said I didn't know. Loretta reached out and smoothed a hand over the child's hair. Why did she ask? Annie stared at the coloring page. Because I told Mrs. Ellis our lights got turned off last week and that's why I didn't finish my reading log on Tuesday night. Loretta closed her eyes for half a second. Children told the truth wherever it landed. That was their innocence. Adults were the ones who taught them which truths became dangerous. And what did Mrs. Ellis say? She told the girl that was a rude question. Good. But then everybody looked at me. The last words came smaller. Loretta took Annie's hand in both of hers. Listen to me, she said quietly. Being short on money is not the same as being short on worth. Annie looked up. Loretta continued, choosing each word carefully, as if laying boards across water one at a time. Sometimes people ask mean questions because they don't know how else to make sense of things that scare them. Trouble scares people. Hard times scare people, so they try to put it on somebody else and point at it. Annie frowned. Are we poor? Loretta's heart broke and held at the same time. We've had some hard days, she said. That's true. But hard days are not who we are. The child thought about that. Then she asked, should I have told her no? Loretta shook her head. You should tell the truth in a way that belongs to you. Annie was quiet. After a moment, a shadow fell across the edge of the chair. Ethan Whitmore stood there, coat over one arm, having come in through the side entrance from a meeting none of them had noticed him leave for. He did not interrupt right away. He simply looked at Annie, then at Loretta, and understood enough. Afternoon, he said softly. Annie sat up straighter. Hi, Mr. Whitmore. Ethan crouched slightly beside the chair. You all right? Annie considered whether to give the easy answer. No, she said honestly. Ethan nodded as if honesty were always the correct first step. That's fair. Loretta rose halfway, embarrassed to have this conversation witnessed by him, by anyone. But Ethan looked at her only once. Enough to make it clear he was not intruding as the owner now, just as someone who recognized the sound of a child trying to make room for hurt inside herself. I heard you handled Mr. Harrow yesterday, he said to Loretta. She blinked. Yes, sir. Claire must have told him, or Claire told someone who told him. Or perhaps in a building like this. Competence moved upward faster than complaints when the right eyes were open. He called this morning, Ethan said. Loretta's stomach dropped. He did? Yes. She braced herself. He wanted to say your judgment was better than most general managers he'd met. For a second she thought she had heard wrong. What? Ethan's expression stayed neutral, but there was unmistakable approval beneath it. He said you were direct, calm, and unwilling to hide behind policy when a solution was available. Loretta sat back slowly. I thought he was irritated. He probably was. People can be irritated and impressed at the same time. Annie looked from one adult to the other. Did Mom do good? Ethan turned to her. Your mother did very good. The child absorbed that like sunlight. But then the earlier sadness returned to her face. A girl at school asked if we were poor. Ethan did not flinch. He did not give the false cheerfulness adults sometimes used around children because they were uncomfortable with hard truths. Instead, he asked, what do you think she meant? Annie frowned. I think she meant broken. That answer stopped both adults. Ethan's gaze changed first. He lowered himself fully into the chair across from Annie. When I was 10, he said quietly, a boy at school asked if my family was trash. Annie stared. Loretta did too. Ethan's voice remained even, but it had lost the polished edge of business entirely now. It sounded like memory. Do you know why, he asked? Annie shook her head. Because my mother's car backfired in the school parking lot, and the rust on the door was so bad you could see through part of it. He thought poor people must be trash because he had never been taught the difference between struggle and character. The lobby seemed to retreat around them. And what did you say? Annie asked. Ethan gave a small breath that might once have been a laugh. Nothing. I was too mad to speak. What happened then? I went home. My mother made tomato soup from a can and grilled cheese, and she told me something I didn't understand until much later. Annie leaned forward. She said, son, the world confuses worn things with worthless things every day. Don't help it make that mistake about you. The words settled into the warm space near the fireplace and stayed there. Annie repeated part of it under her breath. Worn things are not worthless, Ethan finished. Loretta looked down at her daughter and felt tears press unexpectedly at her eyes. Not because the words were sentimental, because they were useful, because they gave shape to something she had been trying to explain with less grace. Annie looked at Ethan with solemn concentration. So if somebody asks again, you can tell them, he said, that hard times happen to good people, and that lights being off for a few days doesn't tell anybody who you are. Annie nodded slowly. Then she asked, did your lights ever go off? Ethan's mouth shifted, not quite a smile. Once, he said. And my mother lit candles and told us it was an adventure. It was not an adventure. That got a laugh out of Annie, small, but real. Loretta covered her mouth for a moment, shaken by how much that small sound relieved her. Ethan rose again, smoothing his coat over one arm. I'll let you two finish talking. Before he could step away, Annie said, Mr. Whitmore? He turned back. Thank you for listening that first night. He met her eyes. Thank you for asking. Then he walked toward the elevators. Loretta watched him go, then looked down at Annie, who had returned to her coloring page with a steadier hand than before. The hotel around them remained what it had always been, rich, polished, efficient, full of people passing through on their way to someplace else. But in one chair near one lamp in one corner of the lobby, something had shifted again. Not the kind of shift that made headlines, the quieter kind. The kind that happens when shame loses its grip because someone finally names it for what it is. Confusion, cruelty, ignorance, fear but not truth. The next Tuesday afternoon felt different from the first one. 3 months earlier, Shelby had walked into Callahan's diner with 2 tired daughters and $11 left in her pocket. That day had smelled like fear and uncertainty, like the sharp edge of survival. She had wrapped half her sandwich in a napkin because she could not afford to trust that tomorrow would come with food. Now the doorbell of the diner rang again as Shelby pushed it open. The sound was the same, but the woman who stepped inside was not the same person. Hadley walked beside her wearing a purple backpack and a jacket that actually fit her shoulders. Ruthie skipped a few steps ahead, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands like it was something fragile and important. The waitress behind the counter looked up. Well, look who's back. Shelby smiled. Hi, Martha. Booth in the corner? The waitress asked. Please. The 3 of them slid into the same red vinyl booth by the window. Outside, winter had settled over the city, leaving the sidewalks edged with thin frost and the sky a pale gray. Hadley opened the menu even though she already knew what she wanted. Grilled cheese and tomato soup, she said. Ruthie lifted her hand proudly. Pancakes. Shelby laughed softly. Pancakes it is. Martha scribbled the order and walked toward the kitchen. Shelby leaned back in the booth and watched her daughters for a moment. Hadley had begun second grade 3 weeks earlier. Her teacher had already called once, not because there was a problem, but because she wanted Shelby to know that Hadley read 2 grade levels ahead and had started helping other students during quiet reading time. Ruthie had discovered crayons again. Real crayons, not the broken stubs from gas station coloring books. Her drawings were everywhere in the small apartment now taped to the refrigerator, tucked into corners of bookshelves, slipped under Shelby's pillow like secret messages. Safety did that to children. It gave them room to grow. Ruthie placed the folded paper on the table. I made something, she announced. Shelby unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing done in thick purple and yellow crayon. 3 stick figures stood in front of a building with a tree beside it. 1 tall figure with brown hair, 2 smaller ones with braids. Above them, Ruthie had written 1 word. Home. Shelby stared at the drawing for a long moment. 3 months earlier, the word had meant something uncertain, something fragile. Now it meant a small apartment with a working stove and a deadbolt on the door. It meant a couch donated by a volunteer and a kitchen table just big enough for 3 plates and a bowl of macaroni. It meant safety. Do you like it? Ruthie asked. Shelby nodded slowly. I love it. Hadley dipped a corner of her grilled cheese into the tomato soup and studied the drawing. You forgot the tree outside our window, she told her sister. Ruthie gasped. Oh no. Shelby laughed. You can add it later. Ruthie seemed relieved. Across the diner, the doorbell rang again as another customer entered. Cold air slipped briefly across the floor before the door closed. Shelby didn't notice. She was watching her daughters, watching the way Ruthie poured syrup on her pancakes with the careful concentration of a scientist, watching Hadley organize her sandwich into perfect squares before taking the first bite. Small habits of children who had learned to stretch food when there wasn't enough. Those habits would fade, eventually. Healing always took time. Hadley looked up from her soup. Mom? Yes? Can we come here every Tuesday? Shelby smiled. If you want. I want. Ruthie nodded vigorously. Me too. Shelby took a bite of her sandwich. 3 months ago, she had wrapped half of it in a napkin to save for later. Today, she ate the whole thing. Outside the diner window, a dark sedan sat parked along the curb. Inside the car, a man in a wool coat watched through the fogged glass for a moment. Grady Ashworth did not step inside. He didn't need to. From where he sat, he could see the shapes clearly enough. A woman in a booth, 2 little girls, one holding up a piece of paper proudly. He could not read the word written on it, but he didn't have to. He had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who had finally found a place where the door could close and the world stayed outside. Grady started the engine. For years, he had carried the memory of a boy standing in a doorway watching his mother whisper, "We're fine." That memory had shaped the man he became. But now, watching Shelby and her daughters through the diner window, he felt something loosen inside his chest. Not relief, not exactly. Something quieter. The feeling of a promise kept. He shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb. The diner doorbell rang again as another customer walked inside. Shelby didn't see the car leave. She was busy laughing as Ruthie tried to draw a tree onto the corner of her picture with sticky fingers. Outside, the winter wind moved gently through the empty street, and somewhere in a small apartment across the city, a deadbolt waited faithfully on a door that now closed every night against the darkness. For the first time in a long time, that darkness no longer belonged to them. This story reminds us that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change the direction of someone's life. Many people carry struggles that the world cannot see: fear, poverty, loneliness, or the quiet pain of trying to protect the people they love. What truly matters is not wealth or power, but the willingness to stop, listen, and help when we can. Compassion has the power to restore dignity, and a single moment of empathy can become the beginning of hope for someone who thought the world had forgotten them. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.